Deep within the grim darkness of the far future, humanity faces countless horrors. Among the most terrifying are the Tyranids, extragalactic horrors that exist solely to consume all biomass in their path. But here's a question that might sound absurd at first, yet becomes increasingly relevant the longer you think about it. If Tyranids eat us, can we eat them? It's the kind of question that seems almost comical until you realise that in the desperate, starving hellscapes that Tyranid invasions create, people might actually try. Today we're diving into one of the strangest corners of Warhammer 40k lore to answer this question, with all the seriousness it deserves. The question itself reveals something profound about the nature of Tyranid invasions. When a hive fleet descends upon a world, it doesn't just kill everyone and leave. It fundamentally transforms the planet into a grotesque feeding ground where the normal rules of biology no longer apply. Supply lines collapse. Food sources vanish. The very atmosphere becomes toxic. In such desperate circumstances, survivors trapped behind enemy lines might look at the scattered corpses of fallen Tyranid organisms and wonder if those mounds of alien flesh could sustain them. After all, if you're starving to death in a bombed-out hive city while Hormagaunts hunt through the ruins above you and you stumble across a dead termagant, the question stops being academic. Before we can answer whether humans can eat Tyranids, we need to understand exactly what Tyranids are made of. These aren't just giant space bugs, despite what their appearance might suggest. They represent something far more sinister and fundamentally alien to anything that evolved within our galaxy. Every Tyranid organism, from the smallest ripper to the most massive bio-titan, is essentially a purpose-built war machine grown from hyper-evolved biological material that has been refined across countless galaxies and millions of years. They are living weapons, and understanding their biology is crucial to understanding why consuming them is such a catastrophically bad idea. To truly grasp why eating a Tyranid is potentially lethal, we need to examine their biological structure in detail. Tyranids don't operate like terrestrial life forms. Where humans and most species in the galaxy have evolved through natural selection over millions of years, Tyranids are deliberately engineered organisms, crafted by the hive mind to fulfill specific roles. Their biology reflects this artificial nature in ways that make them fundamentally incompatible with consumption by other life forms. Let's start with their circulatory system, because even this basic aspect of their anatomy is wrong, in ways that should make any potential consumer pause. Tyranids possess not one, but two entirely separate circulatory systems operating simultaneously. The first is an open circulatory system with incomplete blood vessels, where fluid flows into the spaces between tissues, in a manner somewhat similar to arthropods. The second is a closed system consisting of one systemic heart and two brachial hearts, more akin to what we see in vertebrates. This redundancy ensures that even catastrophic damage to one system won't immediately kill the organism, but it also means that their blood, or what passes for it, is fundamentally different from anything we might recognise as blood. That brings us to what's actually flowing through those strange circulatory systems, and this is where things get truly disturbing. Tyranid blood isn't just a transport medium for oxygen and nutrients. It's infested with what the Adeptus Mechanicus calls phage cells, amoeba-like microscopic organisms that serve multiple terrifying functions simultaneously. These phage cells are perhaps the single most important reason why consuming Tyranid flesh is lethal, so let's examine them in detail. Phage cells are, in essence, tiny Tyranid organisms in their own right. They serve as the Tyranid's digestive system, immune system, and chemical warfare apparatus all at once. Because Tyranids don't have a traditional digestive tract with a stomach and intestines, they rely on these phage cells to break down organic matter at the cellular level. When a Tyranid consumes biomass, the phage cells in its blood attack and dissolve that material, reducing it to basic molecular components that can be absorbed and utilised. These cells are hyper-aggressive and will attack any organic material that isn't recognised as Tyranid in origin. Now, Imagine what happens if you consume Tyranid tissue containing these phage cells. The moment that flesh enters your digestive system, those cells don't recognize your stomach lining as Tyranid tissue. They begin attacking immediately. The phage cells start breaking down your digestive tract at the molecular level, essentially digesting you from the inside out. It's not a quick process like swallowing poison, where you might convulse and die within minutes. It's slower, more insidious. The cells spread through your body via your bloodstream, carried by your own circulation system to every organ, every tissue, every cell. Wherever they go, they begin their work of dissolution and consumption. But phage cells aren't just found in Tyranid blood. They're present throughout every organ, every tissue, every muscle fibre of a Tyranid organism. They're in the flesh you might try to cut off and cook. They're in the organs you might consider eating if you were desperate enough. They permeate every edible part of the creature. Even if you could somehow remove all the obviously toxic parts like venom sacs and acid glands, you'd still be consuming millions upon millions of phage cells with every bite. The terrifying efficiency of phage cells extends beyond simple digestion. They also function as the Tyranid immune system, capable of neutralizing poisons, viruses, and biological attacks. This means they're not just aggressive toward foreign, organic matter, they're also highly resistant to anything that might kill them. Cooking might destroy some percentage of them, but Tyranid organisms are designed to survive in extreme environments. Their cellular components can withstand temperatures that would reduce most organic matter to ash. We see this in how Tyranid organisms can survive in the vacuum of space, endure toxic atmospheres that would kill virtually any other life form, and continue functioning in conditions that would be instantly lethal to humans. Beyond the circulatory nightmare, we need to consider the Tyranid's skeletal and muscular structure. Tyranids possess both an external carapace and an internal skeleton, both of which are reinforced with dense silicate-rich materials. The carapace isn't just armour, it's a biological material with a density and thickness capable of bouncing tank rounds. Between the layers of this carapace are internal cysts filled with a substance called triglycerol, an organic liquid with astounding thermal capacity that helps dissipate the kinetic energy of weapons fire. This isn't something you could eat any more than you could eat ceramite armor plating. The muscles of a Tyranid are equally alien. They exhibit a cross-threaded, fibrous nature that makes them as effective as flak armor against projectiles. This isn't soft tissue that would break down with normal cooking. These are dense, armoured muscle sheaths that have been engineered to serve both locomotive and defensive purposes simultaneously. Even if you could somehow cut through them, even if you could chew them, you'd be trying to digest something that has more in common with Kevlar than with beef. Then there are the specialised biomorphs that many Tyranid organisms carry. Toxin sacs are parasitic glands containing mites that secrete poisons into the host's claws, fangs, and talons. The descriptions of these poisons are genuinely horrifying. Necrotic venoms that cause flesh to rot and slough off. Toxins capable of boiling a victim's blood while it's still in their veins. Corrosive acids that can eat through ceramite armour. Every one of these deadly substances is swimming with phage cells, making them even more dangerous. A Tyranid warrior might have a dozen different toxin sacs distributed throughout its body, each one a concentrated death sentence. Some Tyranid bioforms possess specialised organs like the Venomthrope's toxic miasma vents, which release clouds of microscopic algal formations capable of choking victims on their own blood within seconds of exposure. Others have thorax swarms, where their chest cavity is filled with parasitic organisms that erupt outward to consume eyes and crawl down throats. The point is that there's no part of a Tyranid's anatomy that isn't potentially weaponized. Even the seemingly inert portions of their biology often serve as delivery systems for something lethal. We also need to discuss what Tyranids don't have, because the absence of certain organs is just as telling as what's present. Tyranids lack traditional kidneys, livers, or other glands that in most species would help filter toxins from the body. Instead, that biological space is dedicated to additional defensive systems and redundant organs that protect vital functions. This means that anything toxic or dangerous in a Tyranid's body isn't being filtered out or concentrated in specific organs you could avoid. It's distributed throughout their entire system. There's no liver you could cut away to make the rest safe. The poison is everywhere. The respiratory system of Tyranids is similarly alien. They possess multiple redundant respiratory systems, including gills and simple lungs, capable of rapid adaptation to atmospheric conditions. During a Tyranid invasion, the atmosphere of a planet is deliberately altered by spore chimneys and other bioconstructs, filling the air with xenophagic viruses and bacteria. Tyranid organisms are designed to thrive in these polluted conditions. Their respiratory tissues are saturated with compounds that would be toxic to humans. Even breathing near a dead Tyranid is dangerous, as the spores and microorganisms released from its decaying tissues can infect your lungs. Perhaps most disturbing is the fact that Tyranid genetic material itself is unstable in ways that make it dangerous to consume. The hive mind constantly adapts and evolves its creatures, sometimes within a single generation. This means that the DNA structure of Tyranid organisms is in a state of perpetual flux, responding to threats and incorporating useful genetic material from consumed prey species. When you eat something, you're not just consuming proteins and nutrients, you're exposing your own cells to foreign genetic material. In the case of Tyranids, that genetic material is hyper-aggressive, designed to overwrite and subsume other biological patterns. This is why genostealer cults are so terrifying. The Tyranid genome is infectious in ways that transcend normal biological reproduction. If any species in the Warhammer 40k universe should be able to eat Tyranids, it's the Kroot. These avian-descended mercenaries from the world of Pek have built their entire evolutionary strategy around consuming the flesh of their enemies to incorporate desirable traits into their own genome. They've eaten orcs and gained technological instincts. They've consumed various species across the galaxy and adapted their physiology accordingly. The Kroot represent a form of directed evolution through consumption that should theoretically make them ideal candidates for incorporating Tyranid biomass. And yet, even the Kroot won't touch Tyranid flesh, and understanding why reveals just how dangerous consuming these creatures truly is. The Kroot evolutionary mechanism is fascinating and unique in the 40k universe. When a Kroot consumes flesh, specialized organs absorb genetic material and incorporate useful traits into their genome over successive generations. This isn't a metaphor or a supernatural ability, it's described as a biological process within the lore. If a Kroot kindred extensively feeds on a particularly muscular species like orcs, subsequent generations will display more pronounced musculature. If they consume creatures with specific adaptations, those adaptations can manifest in Kroot offspring. This allows Kroot warbands to specialize for different environments and combat roles through deliberate dietary choices. The Kroot aren't mindless in this process. They're guided by shapers, wise individuals who understand the risks and benefits of consuming different species. Shapers can taste the genetic makeup of flesh, detecting toxins, corruption, and genetic abnormalities that might pose a risk to their kindred. This sensitivity to genetic contamination is what makes their relationship with Tyranids so telling. Kroot shapers don't just discourage eating Tyranids, they've declared all Tyranid bioforms inedible, and in Kroot culture, being declared inedible is as much a moral designation as a gastronomic one. The reasoning behind this prohibition is brutally simple. Tyranid genetics are unstable in ways that no amount of Kroot evolutionary adaptation can safely incorporate. When a shaper examines Tyranid flesh, what they taste isn't just foreign DNA, it's chaos at the molecular level. Tyranid organisms are built to exist for short, violent lifespans. They're created, deployed, fight until they die or win, and then get recycled back into biomass pools. There's no evolutionary pressure for long-term genetic stability because the individual organism is disposable. The genetic instability that shapers detect isn't a flaw, it's a feature. It allows the hive mind to rapidly adapt organisms to changing battlefield conditions, but it also means that anyone trying to incorporate that genetic material is essentially introducing a ticking time bomb into their genome. The few documented cases of Kroot attempting to consume Tyranid flesh paint a horrifying picture. In one instance recorded in lore, a Kroot warrior consumed part of a Genestealer's head. The results were catastrophic. The warrior began mutating rapidly, their body twisting into a berserk multi-limbed hybrid that had to be immediately put down by their kindred. This wasn't a gradual adaptation over generations, this was immediate, uncontrolled transformation. The Genestealer's genetic material didn't just introduce new traits, it overwhelmed the Kroot's own genome, rewriting it according to Tyranid patterns. Even more disturbing is what happens to Kroot who consume pure strain Genestealers. Genestealers are vanguard organisms designed to infiltrate and corrupt other species, inserting Tyranid genetic material into host populations to create hybrid cultists. When a Kroot eats a Genestealer, they're not just getting a meal, they're exposing themselves to the most insidiously infectious organism the Tyranid hive fleets have created. The result is complete subjugation. The Kroot becomes a slave to the hive mind, losing their individual consciousness and becoming nothing more than another tool for the Great Devourer. The Kroot's natural ability to absorb genetic traits becomes a vulnerability, a doorway through which the hive mind can seize control. This is why Kroot shapers can detect Genestealer taint in hybrid flesh, even when the mutations aren't visible. They can taste the Tyranid corruption, the insidious genetic rewriting that marks infected individuals. During the Damocles Crusade, Kroot mercenaries fighting alongside the Toe Empire demonstrated this ability when they refused to consume the bodies of slain Genestealer cult members who appeared fully human. The Shapers knew, on an instinctive level, that those corpses carried contamination that would doom any Kroot who fed upon them. The prohibition extends beyond just Genestealers to all Tyranid bioforms. Even the smaller, seemingly less dangerous organisms like termagants and hormagaunts are forbidden. The Shapers recognise that the genetic instability isn't limited to the obviously horrifying organisms, it's systemic to everything the hive mind creates. A hormagaunt might look like relatively simple biomass, basically a war beast with claws and teeth, but its flesh carries the same hyper-evolutionary genetic patterns as any other Tyranid. Consuming it might not result in immediate transformation, but it would introduce genetic chaos into the Kroot genome that could manifest in unpredictable ways in future generations. There's also the concern about the hive mind connection itself. While Kroot don't have psychic abilities in the same way some species do, they do possess a rudimentary form of genetic memory that allows them to absorb knowledge from consumed flesh. The fear among Shapers is that consuming Tyranid biomass might establish some form of connection to the hive mind, even if only temporarily. Given that the hive mind is a gestalt consciousness spanning billions of organisms across multiple galaxies, any connection to it could be catastrophic. A Kroot who consumed Tyranid flesh might suddenly find themselves experiencing the overwhelming hunger of the swarm, the alien imperatives that drive Tyranid behaviour, or worse, they might become a beacon that helps the hive mind track and target their kindred. It's worth noting that the Kroot have 3 absolute dietary prohibitions. They will not eat toe flesh out of respect for saving their homeworld, they will not eat chaos-tainted flesh because the corruption is too dangerous, and they will not eat Tyranids because the genetic instability makes them fundamentally toxic. The fact that Tyranids are grouped with chaos corruption is profoundly telling. These are species that have evolved eating as their primary means of advancement, who view consuming their enemies as both a practical necessity and a spiritual imperative, and they've placed Tyranids in the same category as the reality-warping infection of the warp. That should tell you everything you need to know about how dangerous Tyranid consumption truly is. There's also a practical consideration that makes Tyranid consumption even less appealing to Kroot. What they would actually gain. The Kroot eat to evolve, to acquire useful traits, but Tyranid traits come with catastrophic downsides. Yes, You might gain some measure of the rapid regeneration that some Tyranid organisms possess, or the acid-spitting capability of certain bioforms. But you'd also be incorporating genetic instability, the drive towards short-term existence, and potentially susceptibility to hive mind control. The cost-benefit analysis simply doesn't work. It's like wanting to acquire the strength of an orc but ending up with uncontrollable rage and reduced intelligence. The downsides vastly outweigh any potential benefits. If there's any group in the Imperium that might theoretically survive eating Tyranid flesh, it would be the Adeptus Astartes. Space Marines are genetically engineered super soldiers with 19 or more implanted organs that grant them capabilities far beyond normal humans. Among these organs is the Omophagia, a specialised implant that allows Marines to learn by consuming the flesh of others. This organ can absorb genetic material from consumed tissue and transmit the information to the Marine's brain as memories or experiences. It's the biological basis for the flesh-eating and blood-drinking rituals practiced by some chapters, and it theoretically should allow Space Marines to safely consume even alien organisms. But even with all their enhancements, even with the Omophagia's sophisticated filtering, Space Marines avoid eating Tyranids, and the reasons why reveal the true danger these creatures represent. The Omophagia is implanted between the thoracic vertebrae and the stomach wall, a complex organ that interfaces with both the Marine's enhanced digestive system and their neurological structure. When a Space Marine consumes flesh, the Omophagia analyzes the genetic material, hormone levels, nutrients, and chemical compositions present in the tissue. This information is then processed and transmitted to the Marine's consciousness, where it manifests as pseudo-memories or instinctual understanding. A Space Marine who eats the brain of a toe might gain basic understanding of the toe language or tactical thinking. One who consumes an orc's flesh might absorb knowledge about orc combat tactics or the locations of nearby war bands. This capability has made the Omophagia an invaluable intelligence-gathering tool. Chapters like the Blood Drinkers and Flesh Tearers have built entire combat doctrines around the strategic consumption of enemy flesh. When isolated behind enemy lines, a Space Marine can theoretically sustain themselves by consuming the flesh of defeated enemies while simultaneously gathering intelligence about enemy positions and strategies. It's a grim, visceral practice that horrifies regular humans, but within the brutal pragmatism of the Adeptus Astartes, it's simply another tool in their arsenal. But there are limits to what even the Omophagia can safely process, and Tyranids push beyond those limits. The organ is designed to filter out toxins and dangerous compounds, to isolate the useful genetic information while discarding the harmful elements. Against most species this works reliably. A Space Marine can consume orc flesh without suffering the fungal infections that would kill a human. They can eat the flesh of Tau or Eldari or various other xenospecies without significant risk. But Tyranid biology is so fundamentally different, so thoroughly saturated with hostile compounds, that even the Omophagia struggles to process it safely. The primary concern is the phage cells we discussed earlier. These microscopic organisms are present in every part of a Tyranid's body, and they don't die immediately when their host organism expires. They remain active for hours or even days after death, continuing to break down organic matter. When a Space Marine consumes Tyranid tissue, those phage cells enter their digestive system and immediately begin attacking the stomach lining. Now, a Space Marine's enhanced constitution can survive damage that would kill a normal human. They have redundant organs, accelerated healing, and an immune system that can fight off most infections. But phage cells aren't a conventional pathogen. They're essentially tiny Tyranid organisms designed to digest biological matter at the cellular level. What happens next is a race between the Marine's enhanced immune system and the phage cell's aggressive digestive capability. The Marine's body recognizes the phage cells as a threat and marshals its considerable defenses. White blood cells attack the invaders. The Omophagia attempts to neutralize the toxic compounds. The Marine's enhanced metabolism works over time to process and eliminate the contamination. In most cases, a Space Marine would probably survive consuming a small amount of Tyranid tissue. Their enhanced physiology is just too robust to be immediately killed by the exposure. But survival comes at a cost. The process would be agonizing. The phage cells would cause internal damage as they're fought off by the immune system. The Omophageia would be strained to its limit trying to filter the toxic compounds. The Marine would experience intense pain as their digestive tract suffered cellular damage. And critically, they wouldn't gain much useful information from the experience. The genetic chaos of Tyranid DNA means that the Omophageia would struggle to extract coherent data. The organ is designed to process and interpret genetic material from species that evolved normally, with stable DNA patterns. Tyranid genetic material is in constant flux, optimized for rapid adaptation rather than information storage. A Space Marine who ate Tyranid flesh might gain vague impressions of hunger or aggression, might develop an instinctual understanding of Tyranid pheromone markers, but they wouldn't gain tactical intelligence or strategic insights. There's also the disturbing possibility of hive mind connection. Space Marines have varying degrees of psychic resistance, but the Omophageia creates a biological link between the Marine and whatever they consume. If a Marine ate the flesh of a synapse creature like a Tyranid warrior or a hive tyrant, organisms that serve as nodes for the hive mind's consciousness, there's a non-zero chance that the Omophageia might establish some form of psychic link. The Marine might suddenly experience the overwhelming presence of the hive mind, that alien consciousness that spans billions of organisms. Even if the connection was temporary, even if it only lasted moments, the psychological trauma could be catastrophic. Imagine experiencing the thoughts and drives of an entity whose sole purpose is to consume all biomass in the galaxy, whose perspective is so fundamentally alien that merely touching it could drive a human insane. This risk is compounded by the fact that the hive mind is actively looking for ways to subvert and control enemy forces. If it detected a Space Marine's consciousness through such a connection, it might attempt to seize control, to rewrite the Marine's neural patterns according to Tyranid imperatives. We see similar processes with genostealer infection, where the Tyranid genetic material gradually overwrites the host genome. A psychic connection through consumed Tyranid flesh might be the opening the hive mind needs to initiate a similar process, not through reproduction, but through direct mental assault. Given all these risks, it's no surprise that Space Marines simply don't eat Tyranids. The practice isn't explicitly forbidden in most chapters, there's no specific edict against it, but it's also not done. Space Marines are pragmatic enough to recognise when a potential tool isn't worth the risk. In combat situations where Marines might otherwise consume enemy flesh for intelligence or sustenance, Tyranids are left untouched. The flesh-eating chapters that build their combat doctrines around the Omophageia specifically avoid Tyranid targets. There's also a practical consideration. Space Marines don't need to eat Tyranids. Unlike desperate civilians or stranded guardsmen, Space Marines can survive extended periods without food. Their enhanced physiology includes redundant nutrient storage and hyper-efficient metabolic processes. A Space Marine can go weeks without eating if necessary, and when they do require sustenance, they have specially formulated nutrient pastes that their power armor can produce. In the brutal calculus of 40k warfare, eating Tyranid flesh offers no advantages and considerable risks, so it simply isn't done. The few theoretical discussions of this topic in the lore generally conclude that if a Space Marine were absolutely forced to consume Tyranid tissue, perhaps in a desperate survival situation where no other options existed, they would probably survive the experience. Their enhanced physiology and the Omophageia's filtering capabilities would likely allow them to process small amounts of Tyranid flesh without immediate death. But they would suffer significant internal damage in the process, and any information gained would be of limited value. It would be an act of desperation, not strategy, and would be avoided whenever possible. If eating Tyranids is dangerous for Kroot and risky for Space Marines, it's instantly lethal for regular humans. Normal baseline humans lack the genetic adaptability of the Kroot, and the enhanced physiology of space marines. When an unaugmented human consumes Tyranid tissue, they are exposing themselves to substances that are designed to break down organic matter at the cellular level, with no defences beyond their normal immune system. The results are predictably catastrophic. Let's start with the immediate physical effects. When Tyranid flesh enters a human digestive system, the phage cells present in that tissue immediately begin attacking the stomach lining. Unlike with space marines, where the enhanced immune system and the homophagia work to neutralise the threat, a regular human's defences are simply inadequate. The phage cells spread rapidly, carried by the bloodstream to every organ in the body. Within hours, the victim would experience intense abdominal pain, as their digestive tract is literally digested from the inside. The stomach lining would begin to break down, causing internal bleeding. The intestinal walls would suffer similar damage. As the phage cells spread through the circulatory system, the effects would become systemic. The cells would attack organ tissues throughout the body. The liver, already stressed from trying to filter the various toxins present in Tyranid flesh, would suffer cellular damage. The kidneys would begin to fail as they attempted to process the breakdown products of the victim's own dissolving tissues. The lungs might be affected if the victim had inhaled any spores during the consumption process, adding respiratory distress to the growing list of symptoms. But phage cells are only part of the problem. Tyranid tissue is saturated with various toxins and venoms that serve different purposes in the living organism. Some are necrotic, causing flesh to rot and die. Others are hemotoxic, destroying blood cells and interfering with clotting. Some toxins are designed to attack the nervous system, causing paralysis or excruciating pain. A single Tyranid bioform might carry a dozen different toxic compounds in its tissues, each one potentially lethal to humans. When you consume that flesh, you're ingesting a concentrated cocktail of substances specifically engineered to kill. The effects wouldn't be limited to acute poisoning. Tyranid genetic material itself represents a contamination risk. The hyper-evolutionary DNA patterns that make Tyranids so dangerous to Kroot would have unpredictable effects on human cells. While humans don't have the Kroot's ability to deliberately incorporate foreign genetic material, they're not immune to genetic damage. The unstable Tyranid DNA could cause mutations in human cells, potentially triggering cancerous growths or other genetic disorders. These effects might not manifest immediately, but over days or weeks the victim could develop tumours or experience organ failure as their cells attempt to process the alien genetic material. We also need to consider the environmental context of Tyranid invasions. When a hive fleet attacks a planet, it doesn't just deploy warrior organisms, it fundamentally transforms the environment through spore chimneys, mycetic spores, and various bioconstructs. The atmosphere becomes saturated with xenophagic viruses and bacteria designed to alter local life forms and make them easier to digest. Any human exposed to this environment is already under biological assault from microscopic Tyranid organisms. Consuming Tyranid flesh in such an environment would be adding insult to injury, introducing even more hostile organisms into a body that's already struggling to survive. The consumption phase of a Tyranid invasion provides perhaps the most horrifying evidence of what Tyranid biology can do to humans. As resistance collapses and the planet enters its final stages before consumption, infected organisms and Genestealer cult members march, blank-faced, into the reclamation pools to be dissolved by digestive enzymes. These pools are essentially giant vats of the same phage cells and digestive compounds present in Tyranid tissue, just in much higher concentrations. The humans who enter these pools are dissolved alive, their bodies broken down into component molecules within minutes. Now imagine that same process happening inside your digestive tract, just more slowly. That's what consuming Tyranid flesh would do to you. Victoria Hayward's novel, Deathworlder, provides some of the most vivid descriptions of what Tyranid contamination does to humans. The story follows Katishan soldiers on a world being actively consumed by Tyranids, and the text describes how even being in proximity to Tyranid spores causes the protagonist to suffer slow biological degradation. Their skin breaks out in rashes where spores have landed. They cough up blood as their lungs are irritated by airborne microorganisms. They experience digestive issues from drinking contaminated water, and this is just from environmental exposure, from being on a Tyranid-infested world. Actually consuming Tyranid tissue would be orders of magnitude worse. The Catachans in Deathworld are among the toughest humans in the Imperium, natives of a death world where everything is trying to kill you from birth. They have enhanced immune systems from a lifetime of exposure to Catian's toxic ecosystem. They know more about surviving in hostile environments than virtually any other human population, and even they wouldn't eat Tyranid flesh. The novel makes it clear that the soldiers recognize Tyranid organisms as fundamentally toxic, incompatible with human biology in ways that no amount of toughness can overcome. There's also the question of cooking. In theory, thorough cooking can kill most microorganisms and denature many toxins, but Tyranid biology is specifically engineered to survive extreme conditions. These organisms can survive in the vacuum of space, endure atmospheric entry, and function in toxic environments that would kill most life instantly. The phage cells and other compounds in their flesh are remarkably heat-resistant. You might be able to cook Tyranid flesh hot enough to destroy some percentage of the phage cells, but you'd likely have to heat it to temperatures that would completely carbonize the tissue, rendering it inedible anyway. And even if you did manage to kill all the phage cells, you'd still be left with meat saturated with various toxins and venoms that might survive the cooking process. Some might wonder about extreme processing. Could you chemically treat Tyranid flesh to neutralize the toxins? Could you use industrial processes to break down the tissue and extract the proteins while filtering out the dangerous compounds? Theoretically, with enough technology and resources, you might be able to do something like this, but consider the context. Tyranid invasions happen on worlds where supply lines have collapsed, where infrastructure is being systematically destroyed, where survivors are huddled in ruins without access to advanced equipment. The people who would be desperate enough to consider eating Tyranids are precisely the people who wouldn't have access to the industrial-scale processing equipment needed to make it safe. There's also the grim fact that even if you could somehow process Tyranid flesh into something technically edible, it wouldn't be nutritious enough to justify the effort. Tyranid organisms are optimized for combat and biomass collection, not nutritional value. Their flesh is dense with structural proteins, chitin, and various compounds that serve military purposes. It's not like eating a cow or even an orc, both of which at least evolved as living organisms with standard biological processes. Tyranids are weapons that happen to be made of meat, and trying to derive nutrition from them would be like trying to digest a tank. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, desperation drives people to extreme measures. When you're starving in a bombed-out hab block while Tyranid swarms hunt through the ruins above, when you haven't eaten in days and your children are dying, when you see a mound of dead Tyranid organisms lying in the street, the question of edibility becomes more than academic. It becomes a matter of survival. So let's seriously consider whether there's any scenario, no matter how desperate, where consuming Tyranid flesh could be worth the risk. The first argument people make is cooking. The logic goes that if you cook something thoroughly enough, you can kill any microorganisms present and denature many toxins. This is generally true for terrestrial organisms. Cooking meat to safe internal temperatures kills bacteria, parasites, and many pathogens. So theoretically, couldn't you just cook Tyranid flesh until it's safe? The problem is the threshold for safety. Phage cells aren't normal bacteria. They're specifically engineered to survive extreme conditions. Tyranid organisms function in the vacuum of space, withstand atmospheric entry, and continue operating in toxic environments. The cellular structures are reinforced and redundant. To reliably kill all the phage cells in a piece of Tyranid tissue, you'd need to heat it to temperatures far beyond what we consider cooking. We're talking about sustained temperatures of several hundred degrees, maintained long enough to thoroughly penetrate the dense armoured tissue. At those temperatures, you're not cooking meat anymore, you're carbonizing it. The proteins would denature so completely that they'd be indigestible. The flesh would turn to ash. You might succeed in killing the phage cells, but you'd destroy any nutritional value in the process, and that's assuming cooking could address the toxin problem, which it can't. Many of the venoms and toxic compounds present in Tyranid tissue are chemically stable at high temperatures. Necrotic venoms, hemotoxins and various other substances would survive cooking just fine. Some might even be concentrated as water content evaporates during the cooking process, making the cooked flesh more dangerous than the raw material. You'd be eating thoroughly cooked phage cells mixed with a concentrated toxic stew. What about chemical treatment? Could you soak Tyranid flesh in strong acids or bases to break down the dangerous compounds? Again, theoretically possible, but practically impossible. The chemical treatments required would be so aggressive that they'd break down the tissue itself. You'd end up with a toxic sludge that might be less immediately dangerous than raw Tyranid flesh, but would still be completely inedible. Plus, where would you get the chemicals? On a world undergoing Tyranid invasion, industrial chemicals are in short supply. The survivors who might consider eating Tyranids are precisely the people who don't have access to chemical laboratories. Some might point to the Imperium's use of corpse starch, the protein paste made from recycled human remains that forms a dietary staple on many hive worlds. If the Imperium can process dead humans into edible paste, couldn't they do the same with Tyranids? The answer is technically yes, but practically pointless. Corpse starch production requires industrial facilities, specialized bacteria that break down the tissues, and quality control to ensure the end product is safe. You can't make corpse starch in your basement from random corpses. It requires infrastructure, and critically, human tissue doesn't contain phage cells or concentrated toxins. Processing human remains into food is disgusting but biologically straightforward. Processing Tyranid remains would require containment protocols, filtration systems, and safety measures that would make the entire endeavour resource negative. There's also a question of necessity. In most Tyranid invasion scenarios, people don't die from starvation while surrounded by edible Tyranid corpses. They die from being eaten by live Tyranids, or from the environmental contamination that makes the planet uninhabitable. By the time you're desperate enough to consider eating Tyranids, you're probably also suffering from exposure to mycetic spores, breathing contaminated air, and experiencing the early stages of the planet's tyrannification. Your immune system is already compromised, your body is already struggling. Adding Tyranid flesh to your diet would simply accelerate your demise. Consider the timeline of a Tyranid invasion. The vanguard phase involves genostealers and lictors infiltrating the planet, assessing defences, and preparing the way for the main assault. Then comes the assault phase, where warrior organisms arrive in force to overwhelm military resistance. This is when most combat occurs and when Tyranid corpses would be most available. But this phase is characterized by active warfare. Battlefields are contaminated with weapons discharge, promethium fires, and the environmental changes that Tyranids bring. Any Tyranid corpse lying on a battlefield has been there for at most a few hours, and it's surrounded by an atmosphere that's increasingly toxic. Once the assault phase ends and the Imperium withdraws or is annihilated, the consumption phase begins. This is when the planet's atmosphere is fundamentally altered, when spore chimneys and capillary towers spring up, when reclamation pools form. During this phase, Tyranid organisms are busy breaking down all biomass on the planet. They're not dying in large numbers because there's no one left to fight them. The few survivors at this stage are hiding in sealed bunkers or underground facilities, not roaming battlefields looking for Tyranid corpses to eat. And if you did somehow access a Tyranid corpse during the consumption phase, it would already be in advanced stages of decomposition, with phage cells actively breaking it down for transport to the reclamation pools. The psychological factor can't be ignored either. Humans have deep-seated evolutionary responses to certain stimuli. We find the smell of rotting meat repulsive because our ancestors who avoided eating spoiled food survived to pass on their genes. Tyranid flesh, even fresh, would trigger similar revulsion. It wouldn't smell like food. It would smell like alien biology, like chemicals and toxins and wrong. The appearance would be equally off-putting. Tyranid muscle tissue is dense, fibrous, often discoloured in unnatural ways. The texture would be wrong. Everything about it would scream danger to your hindbrain, warning you that this isn't food, that consuming it would be a mistake. But let's say someone is desperate enough to ignore all these factors. They're starving, they've lost all hope. They decide to try eating a Tyranid corpse despite knowing the risks. What would actually happen? In the best case scenario, they'd become violently ill within hours. Severe nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, as their body attempts to expel the toxic material. Internal pain as phage cells attack their digestive tract. Fever as their immune system goes into overdrive. Delirium as various toxins affect their nervous system. They'd likely die within a day or two, their last hours spent in agony, as their body literally digests itself from the inside out. In a worse scenario, the Tyranid genetic material might cause immediate mutations. Cells exposed to the unstable DNA might begin replicating incorrectly, causing tumours or tissue damage. The victim might experience rapid, uncontrolled growths, or their organs might begin to fail as cellular structures break down. The process would be agonising and irreversible, a slow transformation into something that's no longer quite human. In the worst scenario, consuming flesh from a synapse creature might establish a connection to the hive mind. The victim would suddenly experience the overwhelming alien consciousness of the Great Devourer. They might lose their individual identity, their thoughts drowned out by the imperative to consume and spread. Even if the connection was temporary, the psychological trauma would be permanent. They'd have touched something so fundamentally hostile to human existence that recovery would be impossible. None of these outcomes are better than starvation. At least starvation is a death you understand, a natural process that, while unpleasant, follows predictable patterns. Tyranid consumption would be a horrific, unnatural death that violates your body at the cellular level. It would be worse than being eaten by Tyranids because at least being eaten is quick. Dying from the inside because you ate them is prolonged agony. The final nail in the coffin for any desperate measures argument is that there are always better options. Even on a world being consumed by Tyranids, there are alternatives to eating alien flesh. Surviving vegetation, though contaminated, might be less immediately toxic than Tyranid tissue. Stored food supplies, even if scarce, would be safer. Even cannibalism, as grim as it sounds, would be biologically safer than consuming Tyranids, because at least human flesh is compatible with human digestion. The Imperium doesn't prohibit consuming Tyranid flesh because they're squeamish about it. They don't prohibit it because it doesn't occur to anyone to try. It's so obviously dangerous that no instruction is necessary. There's an interesting angle to consider that we haven't fully addressed. What do the Tyranids want? Not in the sense of their strategic goals, but in terms of how they structure their biology. Everything about Tyranid organisms is purposefully designed by the hive mind to serve the swarm's needs. So the question becomes, is there anything about Tyranid biology that's specifically designed to prevent consumption by other species? The answer is almost certainly yes, but not in the way you might think. Tyranids aren't designing their organisms to be poisonous to predators because that's not their evolutionary context. On most worlds, Tyranids are the apex predators. Nothing hunts them. Their toxic biology isn't defensive, it's offensive. The phage cells, the venoms, the genetic instability, all of these serve purposes related to consuming prey, not avoiding consumption. But the end result is the same. Tyranid flesh is toxic to eat. Consider the function of phage cells. They're designed to break down consumed biomass at the cellular level, to reduce prey to component molecules that can be absorbed and utilised. This is the core of how Tyranids eat. They don't have stomachs and intestines like terrestrial organisms. Instead, they have a distributed digestive system where phage cells do the work throughout the body. This makes them incredibly efficient at extracting nutrients from prey. but it also means that every cell in their body is essentially digestive tissue. When you eat a Tyranid, you're not eating muscle and organ meat like you would with a cow, you're eating the inside of a stomach. The toxic compounds present in Tyranid tissue also serve specific purposes. Necrotic venoms help break down prey tissue, making it easier to consume. Hemotoxins disrupt blood clotting in prey, ensuring maximum biomass loss. Neurotoxins paralyze victims, making them easier to process. All of these substances are tools for predation, but they also make Tyranid flesh incredibly dangerous to consume. It's not that Tyranids evolved to be poisonous to predators, it's that they evolved to be poisonous to prey, and that same toxicity works against anyone trying to eat them. The genetic instability that makes Tyranid DNA so dangerous isn't a defense mechanism either. It's a feature that allows rapid adaptation to changing battlefield conditions. The hive mind needs to be able to modify organisms quickly in response to enemy tactics. If the enemy deploys more anti-armor weapons, the hive mind can grow thicker carapaces on the next generation of warriors. If the enemy uses more psychers, the hive mind can spawn more zoanthropes to counter them. This flexibility requires genetic material that's highly mutable, capable of rapid change. But that same mutability makes it dangerous for other species to consume because it doesn't follow stable patterns that evolutionary adapted digestive systems can safely process. There's also the matter of how Tyranids recycle their own biomass. When a Tyranid organism dies or completes its mission, it doesn't just lie there and rot. The phage cells in its body remain active, beginning the process of breaking down the tissues for easier transport to reclamation pools. Rippers and other collector organisms will find the corpse and consume it, but if they don't arrive quickly enough, the body essentially digests itself. This autolysis process means that Tyranid corpses have a very short window where they contain anything resembling intact tissue. Within hours of death, a Tyranid body begins breaking down into a soup of proteins and genetic material, ready to be reabsorbed by the swarm. This self-digestion has an interesting implication for anyone trying to eat Tyranid flesh. The freshness window is extremely narrow. A human who wanted to consume Tyranid tissue would need to harvest it immediately after death, before the phage cells begin the autolysis process. But that's precisely when the tissue would be most saturated with active phage cells, most toxic, most dangerous. There's no safe time to harvest Tyranid flesh. Either you take it immediately and get maximum toxicity, or you wait, and the flesh breaks down into inedible sludge. The hive mind's strategic approach to biomass also matters. Tyranids don't leave resources behind. Every death, every corpse, every drop of biological material is reclaimed and reused. This is why planets that survive Tyranid invasions are left as airless rocks. The swarm takes everything. In this context, leaving corpses lying around where other species could consume them would be wasteful. The phage-driven autolysis, the rapid self-digestion of dead organisms, ensures that biomass is available for collection, but not easily stolen by local fauna. It's not a defense mechanism per se, but it has the same effect. We should also consider what consuming Tyranid biomass would mean from the hive mind's perspective. Every Tyranid organism contains genetic information accumulated from countless consumed species across multiple galaxies. That information is valuable. If another species could safely consume Tyranid flesh and extract that genetic data, they might gain insights into Tyranid biology, tactics, or vulnerabilities. The toxicity of Tyranid flesh, intentional or not, prevents this. You can't learn from studying Tyranid genetics if attempting to process that genetic material kills you. There's a darker possibility we should address. What if consuming Tyranid flesh is a vector for genetic corruption? Genestealer cults demonstrate that Tyranids can spread through reproductive infection, inserting their genetic material into host populations to create hybrid organisms loyal to the hive mind. What if consuming Tyranid flesh could serve a similar function? What if the unstable genetic material in Tyranid tissue is designed to corrupt the genomes of anything that consumes it, slowly transforming the consumer into something that the hive mind can use? This is speculation, not confirmed lore, but it's worth considering. The hive mind is patient and subtle in ways that people often overlook. Everyone focuses on the massive fleet actions, the overwhelming swarms, the planet eating. But the Genestealer cult infiltration strategy shows that Tyranids can play the long game when necessary. If consuming Tyranid flesh led to slow genetic corruption, to mutations that made the victim more susceptible to hive mind influence, it could serve as an infiltration vector. A desperate human who ate Tyranid flesh to survive might initially seem fine, but over weeks or months they'd begin to change, their thoughts influenced by Tyranid imperatives, their bodies slowly transforming. Again, this isn't confirmed in the lore, but given how Tyranids operate, it's not implausible. Every aspect of their biology serves the swarm's goals. Making their flesh toxic prevents other species from deriving benefit from Tyranid corpses. Making that toxicity have delayed genetic effects could serve as a subtle infiltration method. The hive mind doesn't think like humans think. It operates on timescales and strategic levels that dwarf human comprehension. Something that seems like a simple biological fact that Tyranid flesh is toxic might serve purposes we haven't fully understood. So, can people eat Tyranids? After examining the question from every angle, considering the biology, the precedents, the desperate scenarios, the answer is clear. Technically, yes, but practically you'd be committing an agonizing form of suicide. A human could physically put Tyranid flesh in their mouth, chew it, and swallow it. That's the technical definition of eating. But that's where the technical possibility ends and the nightmare begins. The moment that flesh reaches your stomach, the phage cells begin their work. Your digestive tract starts being digested from the inside. Toxins flood your bloodstream. The genetic chaos of Tyranid DNA attacks your cells at the molecular level. You might survive a few hours, maybe even a day or two if you're exceptionally hardy. But you'd spend that time in agony as your body betrays you, attacked from within by substances specifically evolved to break down organic matter. There's no cooking method extreme enough to neutralize the threat without destroying any nutritional value. There's no processing technique available to desperate survivors. There's no scenario where eating Tyranid flesh is better than the alternatives. The Kroot, who eat for evolution and have built their entire species around consuming other organisms, won't touch them. Space Marines, with their enhanced physiology, and the Homophagia designed specifically to process alien flesh for information, avoid them. Regular humans don't even consider it because the danger is so obvious. The only people who might try would be those who are already doomed, and their attempt would simply exchange a slow death from starvation for a horrific death from internal dissolution. The grim darkness of the 41st millennium contains horrors beyond counting, but this particular horror is avoidable. When facing Tyranids, you fight them, you run from them, or you die to them. You don't eat them. That's not a victory condition. That's not even a survival strategy. That's just a slower, more painful way to become biomass for the swarm. The hive mind has evolved its organisms to be perfect predators, and part of that perfection is ensuring that nothing can prey upon them in return. Tyranids are the ultimate expression of consumption, creatures that exist solely to eat, and in the beautiful, terrible symmetry of the universe, making themselves the perfect eaters also made them impossible to eat. They are the predator that cannot become prey, the consumer that cannot be consumed, the devourer that turns any attempt to devour it back upon the would-be consumer. So the next time you see a Warhammer 40k battle, where Tyranids are being mowed down by lace gunfire or bolter rounds, remember that those corpses aren't abandoned resources, they're toxic waste. The Imperium doesn't leave them behind out of squeamishness or lack of efficiency. They leave them because touching them is dangerous, and eating them is death. In a universe where humanity regularly practices corpse starch recycling, where cannibalism is sometimes condoned out of necessity, where the line between food and not food is often pragmatically drawn, Tyranids fall firmly on the not food side of that line. The Great Devourer eats everything, but nothing eats the Devourer. That's not a boast, it's a biological reality enforced at the cellular level in ways that make violating it a unique form of suicide. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there are countless ways to die, perhaps the only comfort we can take is that death by eating Tyranids is one that nobody should be stupid enough to choose. If you found this deep dive into one of the stranger corners of 40k lore interesting, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more lore content coming, exploring everything from the most epic battles to the smallest, strangest details of the 40k universe. Drop a comment with your thoughts, or suggest other bizarre questions you'd like us to investigate. Does the Imperium have food safety inspectors? What do orcs taste like? How do space marines handle indigestion? The universe is vast and full of weird questions that deserve serious answers. Until next time, stay safe, stay fed, and for the Emperor's sake, don't eat the space bugs.